Welcome to another episode of Banking on Air with Vacuumlabs. I'm Helene Panzarino, and today I'm joined yet again by David Stancel. You might remember, our regular subscribers, that we've started a cryptocurrency series, and we're now in episode 2. So the first one was really all about Bitcoin, and you can go back and listen to that when you subscribe and listen. The second one, we're going to be looking at Ethereum, but also at smart contracts. So welcome, David. David, for the people that haven't listened to the first one, do you want to give a little introduction of yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here again. I've been researching cryptocurrencies for over 8 years now. Along the way, I did some projects, different kinds of projects like NGOs, lots of educational activities, lots of advisory activities, some NFT startups, and so on and so on. And currently, I also teach at university this beautiful topic of cryptocurrencies. And I'm also CTO at Fumbi, which is a cryptocurrency trading platform.
Well, I think we definitely came to the right guest then to explore this topic. And so I'll also ask you to bear with us because as lay people, which some of us will be, some of the terminology, the vocabulary will be unfamiliar. So we're going to try and unpack that because I think this is one of those things. Of course, in the news recently, we've all been watching what's happening with Bitcoin. We've all been talking about central bank digital currencies. We've all been trying to wrap our heads around what's going on, but it's difficult, isn't it, when you're on the outside? So you're on the inside, you can help us understand more. So I remember in around 2014, 15, people starting to talk about smart contracts and lawyers starting to shake, thinking, oh, we're not going to be here anymore. The same way that AI was going to take everybody's jobs in banking and finance. So, what is a smart contract really?
Yeah, that's a tough question because actually smart contracts are more similar to actual applications and programs than to the regular kind of contracts. So smart contracts are basically ordinary. They are not so smart actually. They are pretty dumb usually, and it's just a application like a piece of code of software that is being run on a decentralized network. So that's basically the one single major difference between the any kind of regular application that is run on a single server architecture and smart contracts that run on blockchain networks such as typically Ethereum or others where they are being simultaneously run on thousands of computers that are in the network. And of course, this network has some peculiar functionalities and traits because it's open, it's very decentralized. Anybody can join the network and participate in the network by running these applications, which of course brings some challenges when it comes to building and deployment of such applications.
David, can I ask you? You said it's an application, which is interesting, and also we could have gone down a whole bunch of jokes about smart lawyers, dumb lawyers. We won't do that. She says, "Does it do something? Does it trigger something by being embedded or part of that network?"
Yeah, I mean, it does whatever we embed into it, whatever we program into it. Actually, even the co-creator of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, he was retrospectively found out or he recognized that the term smart contract was not the best choice for this because, as I said, these kind of programs are like regular kind of piece of software. But the more convenient term for it would be persistent scripts because given the architecture they are deployed on, this decentralized architecture, which is very censorship resistant, one of the traits of this application is that once they are deployed on the network, it's really hard or almost impossible to remove those applications, to stop them, to tamper with the code. And that's probably why we are here and why we are talking about cryptocurrencies and blockchain space, because this is kind of unique trait that has not been present in our world so before the invention of blockchain.
Okay, now I understand better, and I see what you're saying because I think you're right. The term is slightly misleading, and that probably confuses people. Now, we've talked about what they are, and from a piece of part of the tech of it, how do we actually use them currently? And that might be in financial services, but that might be somewhere else. So just maybe a couple of examples of how we use it.
Yeah, probably anybody who has been following the blockchain space could hear probably 1,000 times like how all kinds of application and use cases for blockchain and for smart contracts, since it's basically a piece of software, so it can do pretty much anything you program into it, so it can be used in multiple ways. But still, it's true even today that most of the use cases, whether it's for blockchain, but also for smart contracts, it's in the financial space, in what we call DeFi, decentralized finance, what we'll be talking about probably next time. Most of the things happen currently today when it comes to smart contracts. So we have lots of basically applications, pieces of codes that behave like financial institutions, even though they are not. They are just really like a simple piece of code or set of smart contracts that are composed together and interact with each other, and they perform functionalities such as exchanges, lending platforms, or they allow us to create the synthetic derivatives on top of these blockchain networks, and I don't know, like insurance products and all kinds of things. Of course, apart from these financial use cases, there is lots of things going on in the area of logistics, healthcare industry as well. And basically, these smart contracts could allow us to, of course, automate a lot of processes in all of these areas. But true is most of the attention is still being paid to the financial use cases.
And could one of the ones that's in, for example, you mentioned, shipping or in other areas, is that something like, could smart contracts be used in trade finance in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. Trade finance is definitely one of the areas where it's being explored and being used. What it boils down to is always that traditionally, oftentimes it was the case that in the corporate environment, enterprise environment, when it comes to blockchain, there was always this kind of dilemma whether to use permissionless open public blockchain networks or the so-called private blockchain networks that are set up only between some of the entities involved in those business processes or consortia. Typically, in this way, if you have a more permissioned environment, the blockchain kind of a little bit is losing the edge compared to regular enterprise legacy solutions and databases. So it can be done there, but because it usually has been deployed in this way, we couldn't see so much network effect and adoption coming in there.
And I can appreciate the permissioned blockchains, or almost like databases, to be honest, in some ways, aren't they? There's some ways of would be confine it or safer. I think there was always also that discussion whether it's true or not about the amount of energy involved in mining, and rogue miners and how they could have control. And if you're in financial services, then we don't need that. We need some other form of control. And let's say permissioned blockchains or wannabes, people in this space, are having problems with some of the regulators and in other areas as well. So it's not been a smooth ride, really, for anybody, I think, in that space either. You mentioned Ethereum early on. And again, in episode 1, we talked about the actual Bitcoin because it was, it's all the rage, as it were. So what is Ethereum and how is it different to Bitcoin?
Okay, so Ethereum was created by probably now already quite famous person, founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, who was back then a young boy. He was a journalist at Bitcoin magazine. He was a college dropout who started to work on Ethereum because he basically took the concept of Bitcoin and was like, okay, we have a really cool decentralized network that we use for sending and receiving transactions and moving the store like some value over the internet natively, but we could extend this concept and enrich it with some other functionalities, not just to do kind of simple transactions, but basically we could try to upload any kind of programs and applications. So he conceived the concept of this blockchain network that would have on top of it a virtual, like a Turing complete virtual machine, which would be capable to compute anything that we program into it, given enough computational power. And so that's what he did. He wasn't actually the first one to do so. There were some attempts before Ethereum was conceived, but they kind of failed. And Ethereum was probably definitely the only one at that point, around 2013, when it was introduced, caught up and got lots of attention from the community. And lots of people started to work on it. And then in 2015, the Ethereum network launched and allowed us to do these smart contract applications, to create assets on top of Ethereum, which was not so easy to do on top of Bitcoin. Even though if we would probably talk to Bitcoin maximalists, they would argue that you can do all these things also on top of Bitcoin, but it's more complicated, and for some reason it doesn't happen there so much. So at least in this era, this Ethereum stole the show for the Bitcoin, and now also that's why a lot of people think that there is also this discussion about possible flippening, which means that Ethereum would flip Bitcoin in terms of the market cap value, and because it can actually capture a whole lot more value because there's so much more activity on top of the Ethereum, which is actually true. For many people don't know that, but for the last few months, that has been the true, that Ethereum has been settling much larger volumes, transaction volumes. There has been much more going on the network because it can be used for so many use cases. And it has also become infamously victim of its own success because the network is congested and there are very high fees currently on the network, which are being solved through many other solutions. But this is how Ethereum is different to Bitcoin. And of course, now in 2021, we have also a lot of competitors to Ethereum that are trying to enter the arena of smart contracts and then are coming up with different innovations and different design trade-offs for the smart contract networks.
You mentioned assets and uses or use cases in the Ethereum. So could you give a couple of examples of what assets might be created or what a couple of these use cases might be?
Yeah, so probably people who have been following the blockchain space, they remember the term ICO and this ICO craze that we had 2017,
It
where
seems
lots
like
of
a
lots.
long time ago. I don't.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, we had lots of projects that are trying to integrate blockchain to their applications. And usually what it meant was that they can kind of created a token that had some artificially created functionality and role. And it was just like a concept of, I don't know, before we called it credits or something like that. It depends on the application, but now they were not on an SQL database, but they were on a decentralized blockchain network, and they were more liquid. There, people and users could trade with them, and that's exactly what fueled the hype around it. And we could witness all very a broad spectrum of assets being created there, and also, when we look at today in all this DeFi space, we have these different decentralized smart contract applications that are performing these financial activities. And because there are still some decisions that needs to be made from the perspective of the applications. So how do we do it? We have token holders that have this token and have governance rights, so they can vote on the changes on the protocols. And oftentimes, these tokens come with of different sets of rights or different sets of benefits. Sometimes they can even get some portion of the reward or of the profit generated by those protocols and so on. It can be different, but this is roughly that, like what's going on there. And we have now all these crypto assets that are from a technological point of view, they are pretty similar because they are just so-called ERC20 tokens, and but they have always a different function in their own ecosystem.
It's interesting because it seems like, 2017 is almost, we won't call it ancient history, but do you remember the craze and the whole FOMO around it, that fear of missing out and closed, a token within a closed environment. If you had a telco involved and a bunch of retailers, you could spend and get tokens and spend them within that closed environment and then go out to market and raise money initially for marketing and then for more. And it almost seems like that came and it went, and we forgot about that. As you said, the ICO was all the rage, right? And then we haven't spoken about it anymore. Now we're speaking more about the different, as you said, Ethereum and the competitors. So is it becoming now a very competitive environment? Are there, 5, 10, 20, 100 competitors to Ethereum?
Ethereum historically has always had much more competitors than Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin has a unique place in the cryptocurrency world that cannot be replicated so easily. But with Ethereum, it's not that easy, or it's more complicated. And the reason is that also a lot of smart contract platforms that are coming to the market, they are for example, oftentimes replicate the Ethereum virtual machine. So if developers want to develop on these new platforms, they can still use the same smart contract, the same language Solidity that is used on Ethereum. So it's kind of easy for them to transfer. Of course, these new networks, there are quite many of them. I think today we can say that there are at least reasonable, like 10 reasonable competitors when it comes to the smart contract platforms. And all of them, let's say these 10 or 15 maybe even, they come with different technologies. With some of them are pretty innovative. They do offer different trade-offs. They are typically more scalable than Ethereum, but again, at some costs. And that's a more nuanced and deeper debate that we're probably not going to have today. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of competitors, especially this last year. We could see probably at least like 7, 8 major smart contract platform being launched, and it's still, we can say it's in the beginning. Like all these platforms just are now trying to bootstrap some communities and show off.
And is there, with this is maybe a naive question for someone, as I said, who's more a layperson in this space, is there an interoperability between these different competitors? And actually, what's the interoperability when it comes to fiat, for example, with crypto as well? Or does that exist?
Oh yeah, I mean, so the
That's a
interoperability with
funny word,
fiat
isn't it?
world,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tough one. So this phenomenon is usually provided by exchanges or brokerage, companies typically. So that's how usually people transfer their fiat money into these smart contract platforms. And the interoperability between the contract platforms themselves, it's a little bit more trickier. There's no simple answer to that, but we do have definitely multiple ways how different smart contract platforms can communicate between each other. Oftentimes there are some ways that are more centralized, and we have to kind of more rely on the third parties that we need to trust. And also, especially recently in the past few months, we could see on the market some of the first solutions that are trying to completely also mitigate this need to trust the third party even in this way. So some so-called bridges that connect these platforms and that provide sort of trustless way how to transfer assets between those platforms. So, but it's still, again, very early for the space. It's very likely that, I think in a matter of 2 years, let's say, all these major platforms will be interconnected. But at this point, we can say that usually Ethereum is connected probably to every single major competitor, but all those other networks are not connected between themselves. So Ethereum is definitely the I would say trading venue of the new internet.
It's really fascinating, actually. And as you were talking, I was also thinking about everything that's happened over like the last year and a half. And every time we talk about a cryptocurrency, we think about people that are outside the mainstream system. I mean, now we're splitting and we're talking about central bank digital currencies as well as sitting alongside fiat. But also, I sometimes think, industries run away with what the customer or the consumer wants. Are these solutions really beneficial to the consumer and the end user? And possibly, let's drill a little bit closer down on the unbanked or the underbanked, people outside of the mainstream system. Or is that just something that the industries, we just talk about that as marketing hype?
All of these things, yeah, were created in a way, and they were designed in a way so they are completely permissionless and accessible ideally to everybody on the planet who has connection to the internet. But especially recently, as the network got really popular and it got congested, the fees skyrocketed. It basically eliminated all the regular, mainstream retail users, and it has been the main trading venue for the speculators, market makers, and really people who trade a lot. But I think looking forward, the outlook is that definitely these all these networks will be much more easier to use for regular people. I think kind of by accident, what Ethereum happened to achieve is that I think they kind of almost solved this one of the kind of questions on the open internet, the single
Mm.
sign-on, because now if you have extensions to your browser such as MetaMask, which is probably one of the most used and most popular pieces of infrastructure when it comes to the Ethereum and the smart contract world. You can basically, log in with this through MetaMask and through your Ethereum account to multiple services, and they don't need to even know your other identity because they just know your address. And since we are on the blockchain, all your past actions are being logged and recorded and are there out to be seen by everyone.
Everyone on the blockchain. Or
On the blockchain.
Exactly. Okay. And actually, no, this raises a really important point about the anonymity, but also having enough information about somebody. We're talking about that clearly in terms of digital identity after what happened around the world and in terms of COVID. You don't need to know everything about me for me to walk into a bar and buy a drink with my token or anything else that I'm using. You just need to know that I have the right, I have the permission to be able to do that. You don't need to know my medical history, my address, my telephone number, my age, my all the other things about me, as long as the token says that I am where I'm supposed to be or I'm allowed to be. And I think this opens up that discussion.
Yeah, I think if you show me your Ethereum address, I can say what kind of person you are.
I'm somebody who's probably more technically adept than I am, to be honest, if I have an Ethereum address, right? And I'm heavily into the trading. I mean, for me, this is fascinating. I was 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, a week and a half ago, I was on a panel, and the Vitaly was the keynote that kicked off the panel in the Middle East. So, I think we also, the rest of the other parts of the world now are starting to look at this also as Africa, MENA, the whole MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, is now taking notice. Whereas before it might have been something that we just looked at in our own little bubble, which is why I think also in my head I was thinking, how does this help with parts of the world where we have a lot of remittance happening, or we have a lot of people that are coming in and working from abroad, where we have a lot of people who are unbanked and underbanked but have access to smartphones, where we're not, some have very deep internet penetration, others don't. And so they're just on not smartphones, but dumb phones, or on phones that aren't accessing. But it's definitely something that's capturing people's imagination more on a global basis. So I have no doubt that we'll be revisiting this subject. I know we're coming up, actually, everybody, on episode 3 of this series. We are going to look at decentralized finance and NFTs. Oh, I could talk for years about NFTs and whether or not they're actually going to stick around or not, or is it just a fad? So, David, I feel more knowledgeable now than I did when we started, which is great. And I felt the same way when we finished the Bitcoin session. So I thank you for that. And I would say to everybody, if you're subscribing or you're joining us for the first time, go back and listen to the first episode and stay with us for the third episode, as I said, when we get to DeFi and NFTs. Thank you very much for being with us on Banking on Air. And everyone, please, for all the usual channels, to subscribe and join us again. Thoroughly enjoyable.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.